The gunshot echoed across the barren plains of Arizona Territory, 1878, startling Zara Anderson from her fitful sleep beneath the makeshift shelter of her overturned wagon. 6 months pregnant and completely alone, she clutched her rounded belly with trembling hands as she peered into the dawn light, searching for the source of the disturbance. Her supplies had dwindled to nearly nothing, and the broken wagon wheel that had stranded her 3 days ago might as well have been her death sentence. The sound of approaching hoofbeats sent her scrambling for the small derringer hidden in the folds of her skirt, the last gift from her deceased husband before the raiders had taken him. With the rising sun at his back, the silhouette of a lone rider appeared on the horizon, growing larger with each passing second. Zara steeled herself, knowing that in this untamed land, a woman alone was considered prey. "Easy there, madam," a deep voice called out as the rider slowed his approach. "Ain't looking for trouble." The man dismounted smoothly from his chestnut stallion, keeping his movements deliberate and slow. When he stepped into the light, Zara could see he was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of weathered sage. His clothes were dust-covered but of good quality, a dark vest over a faded blue shirt, worn denim pants, and boots that had seen their fair share of trails. The gleaming sheriff's badge on his chest caught the sunlight. "Sheriff Kaine Galloway," he said, tipping his hat. "Pyramid City's lawman. Heard a shot and came to investigate." His eyes took in her condition, the broken wagon, and the meager supplies scattered around her campsite. "Looks like you could use some assistance." Zara kept the derringer pointed at him, her hand shaking. "I fired a warning shot at a coyote. Don't need charity, just passing through." The sheriff nodded, respecting the distance she maintained. "Madam, you're a good 40 miles from Pyramid City with a broken wagon and—" His eyes briefly flicked to her pregnant belly. "In no condition to be walking that distance. Begging your pardon." "My husband will be back shortly," she lied, her voice betraying her fear. The sheriff's eyes softened as he glanced at the grave marker she'd fashioned from broken wagon parts, visible just beyond the campsite. He removed his hat in a gesture of respect. "I doubt that very much, madam." Tears sprang unbidden to Zara's eyes, and the derringer wavered in her grasp. "Leave me be," she whispered, though the fight had gone out of her voice. Sheriff Galloway took a cautious step forward. "I can't do that in good conscience. 2 hearts need a home, and I have room for both. My place in town isn't much, but it's shelter and I've got plenty of supplies. At least until you decide what's next." The sincerity in his voice made her hesitate. After weeks of grief and terror, after burying Thomas with her own hands when the raiders had left, after struggling to keep moving west despite her condition, the simple offer of kindness was almost too much to bear. "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked, finally lowering her weapon. The sheriff replaced his hat and offered a gentle smile that reached his eyes. "Because there was a time someone did the same for me when I had nothing. Name's Kaine, by the way. Kaine Galloway." "Zara Anderson," she replied after a long moment. "My husband Thomas and I were heading to California." She glanced at the simple cross marker. "I buried him 4 weeks ago." Sheriff Galloway nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Anderson. No one should face the trail alone, especially in your condition." He gestured to his horse. "We can salvage what we can from your wagon, but I think it's best if we get you to town before nightfall." As Zara considered his offer, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen, causing her to double over with a gasp. Kaine was at her side in an instant, his strong hands supporting her. "That settles it," he said firmly. "You're coming with me to Pyramid City." Too exhausted to argue further, Zara nodded. "Thank you, Sheriff Galloway. Just Kaine, madam. Out here. Titles don't mean much when someone needs help." As he helped gather her meager belongings, Zara watched him move with efficient purpose. He wasn't what she'd expected from the notorious Arizona Territory, a lawman with kindness in his eyes and gentleness in his calloused hands. Within the hour, Kaine had secured her remaining possessions to his horse and fashioned a more comfortable seat for her using blankets. With one last look at her husband's grave, Zara allowed herself to be lifted onto the saddle. Kaine mounted behind her, his arms creating a protective circle around her as he took the reins. "I'm not one to pry," he said as they set off toward Pyramid City, "but knowing a bit about your situation might help me figure out how best to assist you." Zara stiffened against him. "There's not much to tell. Thomas and I left Missouri hoping to start fresh in California. We had dreams of an orange grove." Her voice caught as she remembered her husband's enthusiasm. "Raiders struck our wagon train 2 days out from Fort Richardson. Thomas fought them off long enough for me to hide. When I returned, he was—" She couldn't finish. Kaine's arms tightened slightly around her, not an embrace, but a gesture of solidarity. "And you've been traveling alone since then?" She nodded. "The other wagons had gone ahead. I buried him and kept moving. What else could I do?" "You're a brave woman, Mrs. Anderson." "Not brave," she corrected. "Desperate." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic motion of the horse and the warmth of another human presence lulling Zara into the first real rest she'd had in weeks. She didn't realize she'd fallen asleep until Kaine's voice gently roused her. "Pyramid City's just ahead," he said, pointing to a collection of buildings shimmering in the afternoon heat. "It's not much compared to Missouri, but we've got the essentials: general store, doctor, hotel, church, and a lawman who keeps the peace." Zara blinked against the bright sunlight, taking in her first glimpse of civilization in over a month. Pyramid City was indeed small, no more than 24 buildings arranged along a main street with a few side alleys branching off. A tall church steeple stood at one end, and various businesses lined the dusty thoroughfare. People moved about their business, pausing occasionally to gaze at the approaching riders. "Word travels fast in a small town," Kaine warned her. "Folks will be curious, but they're good people for the most part." As they rode down the main street, Zara became acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. Her once fine dress was torn and dirt-stained, her hair a tangled mess beneath her bonnet. She straightened as much as her condition would allow, unwilling to enter this new community appearing completely defeated. They stopped in front of a modest 2-story building with Sheriff painted above the door. A small but well-maintained garden of desert flowers and cacti adorned one side, an unexpected touch of beauty. "My office is downstairs," Kaine explained as he dismounted, then carefully helped her down. "Living quarters are above. Used to be the jail and sheriff's office were separate, but after the last expansion, they combined everything. Makes for easier nights when there's trouble." The curious stares of passers-by made Zara uncomfortable, and she instinctively placed a protective hand over her belly. "Sheriff Galloway," a woman's voice called out. A plump, gray-haired lady hurried across the street, her kind face creased with concern. "I saw you riding in. Is everything all right?" "Mrs. Whitley," Kaine greeted her with a respectful nod. "This is Mrs. Anderson. She's had some trouble on the trail. I was hoping you might help her get settled while I tend to my horse and bring in her belongings." Mrs. Whitley's assessing gaze took in Zara's condition, and her expression softened immediately. "Of course. You poor dear. Come with me." She took Zara's arm gently. "Let's get you cleaned up and resting properly." Before Zara could protest, the older woman was guiding her toward the stairs at the side of the building that led to the sheriff's quarters. "The sheriff's a good man," Mrs. Whitley confided. "Lost his wife and child to fever 5 years back. Keeps to himself mostly, but fair and kind to those in need." The information gave Zara pause. Perhaps that explained his understanding of her situation. He too had experienced profound loss. The living quarters above the sheriff's office were simple but unexpectedly comfortable. A main room with a small kitchen area, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, bookshelves filled with volumes, and a stone fireplace. 2 doors led off to what Zara assumed were bedrooms. Everything was neat and orderly, if somewhat Spartan. "The sheriff keeps a clean house," Mrs. Whitley commented, seeming a bit surprised herself. "But we'll need to make up the spare room properly for you. It's been used for storage mostly since." She didn't finish the thought, but Zara understood. "Since his family died." "I don't wish to impose," Zara began, but Mrs. Whitley waved away her concerns. "Nonsense. The sheriff wouldn't have brought you here if he didn't mean for you to stay. Now let me heat some water for a proper bath. You look like you could use one, and it'll help with the aches of pregnancy." Within the hour, Zara found herself soaking in a copper tub, the warm water soothing her tired muscles and washing away weeks of dust and grief. Mrs. Whitley had provided a clean nightgown and robe, promising to send over some proper maternity dresses the next day. "My daughter left some behind after her last visit," she'd explained. "They should fit you well enough until we can arrange something more suitable." Clean and dressed in the borrowed clothes, Zara felt human again for the first time in weeks. The spare room had been quickly transformed into a comfortable bedroom, with fresh linens and a small vase of desert flowers on the bedside table. When Kaine returned upstairs, he carried her salvaged possessions and a tray of food from the hotel restaurant. "Mrs. Whitley said you should eat and rest," he explained, setting down the tray. "Dr. Wilson will stop by in the morning to check on you." "I can't repay you for all this," Zara admitted, embarrassed by her dependence. Kaine shook his head. "Not asking for payment, just helping a neighbor in need." "We're hardly neighbors, Sheriff. I'm just passing through. In these parts, anyone within 100 miles is a neighbor." His smile was gentle. "And I meant what I said out there, Mrs. Anderson. You and your little one are welcome to stay as long as needed." After he left her to her meal and rest, Zara sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden change in her circumstances. Yesterday, she'd been facing death alone in the desert. Today, she had shelter, food, and the protection of a man who seemed to expect nothing in return. It was almost too good to be true, and years of hard living had taught her that such things usually were. Yet, as she drifted off to sleep on a real mattress for the first time in months, Zara couldn't help the small flame of hope that flickered to life in her heart. Morning came with the sounds of a town awakening, merchants opening shops, horses and wagons passing by, people calling greetings to one another. Zara rose and dressed in the clothes Mrs. Whitley had brought, relieved to find they fit her expanded waistline comfortably. When she ventured into the main room, she found Kaine at the small stove, frying bacon and eggs. "Good morning," he said, glancing up with a smile. "Thought you might be hungry. Hope you like your eggs over easy." "That's very kind, thank you." Zara took a seat at the table, noting it had been set with proper plates and silverware. "Do you always cook for yourself?" "Have to. Mrs. Whitley offered to help when I first took the job, but a man needs to learn to fend for himself." He served up 2 plates and joined her at the table. "Sleep well." "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted. They ate in comfortable silence until a knock at the door announced Dr. Wilson's arrival. The doctor was a thin man with spectacles and a gentle demeanor that put Zara at ease as he examined her. "You're exhausted and somewhat malnourished," he concluded. "But the baby seems strong. I recommend rest, regular meals, and avoiding stress for the remainder of your pregnancy." He glanced at Kaine. "Sheriff, you did the right thing bringing her in. Another few days out there alone." He left the sentence unfinished. After the doctor left, promising to return in a week, Kaine brought up the question Zara had been dreading. "What are your plans now, Mrs. Anderson?" She stared out the window at the dusty street below. "I don't know. Thomas and I were heading to California. His brother has land there, but—" She twisted her wedding ring. "I've never met him. I'm not sure I'd be welcome, especially like this." Kaine considered her words. "Well, no rush to decide. As I said, you're welcome here until after the baby comes, at least." Over the following days, a routine developed. Kaine would rise early, prepare breakfast for them both, then head downstairs to his sheriff's duties. Zara, initially uncomfortable with idleness, began to help around the living quarters, cleaning and organizing the space that had clearly been neglected in certain aspects despite Kaine's orderliness. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of books she'd found in a corner, Zara discovered a small, leather-bound journal. It fell open to a page with a pressed flower, a desert lily, and a woman's delicate handwriting. "Kaine brought home another lily today. He says they remind him of my strength in this harsh place. Such a romantic beneath that stern exterior." Zara closed the journal quickly, realizing it must have belonged to Kaine's wife. She returned it to the box, but not before noticing the framed photograph beside it, a handsome younger Kaine standing proudly beside a pretty woman holding an infant. That evening, when Kaine returned from his duties, Zara hesitated before mentioning her discovery. "I found a box of books today. I hope you don't mind if I read some." "Help yourself," he said easily. Sarah loved books. Always said they were windows to worlds we'd never see otherwise. The mention of his wife's name hung in the air between them. Zara gathered her courage. "Mrs. Whitley told me about your loss. I'm sorry." Kaine's expression remained steady, though something flickered in his eyes. "It was 5 years ago. Fever took them both within days of each other. Sarah and our little boy, James." He cleared his throat. "That's why I became sheriff here. Needed something to keep me going." "I understand," Zara said softly. "After Thomas died, all I could think about was the baby. Had to keep moving forward for this little one." Kaine nodded, their shared understanding of grief creating a deeper connection between them. "Life doesn't stop for our sorrows," he observed. "Sometimes that's a curse, sometimes a blessing." As weeks passed, Zara became a familiar sight in Pyramid City, initially accompanied by Mrs. Whitley or Kaine on short walks to rebuild her strength, then venturing out alone to the general store or to sit in the small-town garden. The townspeople, after their initial curiosity, accepted her presence with the matter-of-factness of frontier folk accustomed to strangers with complicated pasts. Kaine found himself looking forward to returning home each evening, where Zara would have dinner waiting and conversation that stimulated his mind. She was well-read and thoughtful, with opinions on everything from politics to literature. He began bringing home newspapers and books from his office, eager to hear her perspectives. "You don't have to cook for me," he protested one evening after a particularly delicious stew. "I enjoy it," Zara replied, resting a hand on her growing belly. "Besides, I need to earn my keep somehow." "You're not a servant, Zara," he said, using her given name for the first time. "You're my guest." She smiled, touched by his insistence. "Then consider it a friend helping a friend." Friend. The word felt both right and somehow insufficient for what was developing between them, a connection born of shared grief and daily interactions that had become precious to them both. One evening in early November, as they sat before the fireplace discussing a book they'd both read, Zara gasped and clutched her belly. Kaine was at her side instantly. "What is it? Shall I fetch the doctor?" "No," she laughed, taking his hand and placing it on her abdomen. "Feel." Beneath his palm, Kaine felt the distinct movement of the child within her. The sensation was so intimate, so miraculous, that it brought unexpected tears to his eyes. "That's quite a kick," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "He's been active all day," Zara said, then corrected herself. "Or she. I don't know which. Either way, you've got a strong one there." Kaine reluctantly withdrew his hand, but remained seated close beside her. That night marked a shift in their relationship. The physical contact, though innocent, had broken down a barrier. In the days that followed, small touches became common: a hand on an arm to emphasize a point, fingers brushing while passing a plate, a steadying arm around her waist as her balance became more precarious with her advancing pregnancy. By December, with Zara entering her 8th month, Pyramid City was preparing for Christmas. The townspeople had embraced her as one of their own, and several of the women organized a baby gathering to provide necessities for the coming child. Zara was overwhelmed by their generosity: handmade blankets, tiny clothes, a beautiful wooden cradle crafted by Mr. Jenkins the carpenter. "I don't deserve all this," she confessed to Mrs. Whitley as they arranged the gifts in the nursery corner of her room. "Nonsense," the older woman replied. "Every child deserves a proper welcome, and every mother deserves support." "But I'm not staying permanently," Zara reminded her, though the words felt less certain than they once had. Mrs. Whitley gave her a knowing look. "Aren't you? The sheriff's been happier these past months than I've seen him since Sarah passed. And you glow when he enters a room." "That's just pregnancy," Zara protested weakly. "If you say so, dear." Mrs. Whitley patted her hand. "But I've seen the way you look at each other when you think no one's watching." That evening, as snow began to fall outside, a rare occurrence in this part of Arizona, Kaine returned home with a small fir tree balanced on his shoulder. "What's this?" Zara asked, laughing at the sight. "Christmas tree," he announced, setting it up in a corner of the main room. "Thought it might brighten things up." Together they decorated the little tree with paper stars Zara cut from old wanted posters and strings of dried berries. As they worked, their hands kept meeting, lingering longer each time. "I haven't celebrated Christmas properly since Sarah died," Kaine admitted as they sat admiring their handiwork. "Never seemed much point." "Thomas and I were married at Christmas," Zara shared. "Just a simple ceremony in my parents' home. We had such plans." She trailed off, surprised to find that thinking of Thomas now brought a gentle sadness rather than the sharp pain of earlier months. Kaine reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "Life has a way of changing our plans. Sometimes for worse, sometimes." He looked at her intently. "Sometimes for better." The moments stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Zara felt her heart racing, aware that they stood at a crossroads. Before either could speak, however, a commotion from downstairs interrupted them. "Sheriff!" a voice called urgently. "Sheriff Galloway." Kaine reluctantly released her hand and went to the window. "It's Deputy Evans. Something's wrong." He grabbed his coat and gun belt. "Stay here. I'll be back as soon as I can." Left alone, Zara paced anxiously, watching from the window as Kaine and several men rode out of town at a gallop. The hours crept by and her worry grew. When midnight came with no sign of their return, she finally retreated to bed, though sleep eluded her. She was awakened before dawn by the sound of horses and men's voices. Wrapping herself in a shawl, she went to the window to see Kaine dismounting, his expression grim. Several men carried what appeared to be a wounded person toward the doctor's house. When Kaine entered their quarters, his face was haggard, a streak of blood on his sleeve. "Sorry to wake you," he said quietly. "What happened?" Zara asked, helping him remove his coat. "Stagecoach robbery about 10 miles south." He sank into a chair, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "Driver was shot, but he'll live. We caught one of the bandits, but 2 others escaped." Zara brought him a glass of whiskey, which he accepted gratefully. "You're hurt?" she observed, noticing a cut on his hand. It's nothing, just a scratch from the chase. Despite his protests, she insisted on cleaning and bandaging the wound. As she worked, their faces close together in the lamplight, Kaine found himself studying the gentle curve of her cheek, the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the strand of dark hair that had escaped her braid. "Zara," he said softly, his voice rougher than he intended. She looked up, her hands stilling on his. "Yes. I know you've been planning to move on after the baby comes. But," he hesitated, then pressed on, "I'd like you to consider staying. Permanently." Her eyes widened. "Kaine, I'm not asking out of pity or duty," he clarified quickly. "These past months with you here, I've started living again, not just existing. And I hope you might feel something similar." Zara's heart pounded in her chest. "What exactly are you proposing, Sheriff Galloway?" "Not marriage. Not yet." He turned his hand to grasp hers. "That would be too soon for both of us. But a chance to see if what's growing between us could become something more. Partnership, perhaps. For now." Tears sprang to her eyes, surprising her. "I've been afraid to admit how much I've come to care for you," she confessed. "It felt disloyal to Thomas, to his memory." "I understand that feeling all too well," Kaine said. "Took me years to stop feeling guilty for continuing to breathe when Sarah couldn't. But I've come to believe they wouldn't want us to stop living because they had to." Zara nodded, her free hand moving to rest on her belly where the baby shifted restlessly. "This little one deserves a father," she said softly. "And I've seen how good you would be in that role. You're kind and patient and strong. I'm offering my heart and my home to both of you," Kaine said. "No obligations, no rush. We take each day as it comes and see where it leads us." Zara leaned forward, brushing her lips against his in a gentle kiss that held both promise and question. Kaine responded with careful tenderness, mindful of her condition and the fragility of the moment. When they parted, a sense of rightness settled over them both. "I'll stay," Zara whispered. "At least until we know for sure what this is between us." The days leading up to Christmas passed in a glow of cautious joy. Their relationship remained chaste but affectionate, with lingering touches and stolen kisses that spoke of deeper feelings growing steadily between them. The town noticed the change. Of course, Mrs. Whitley's knowing smiles and the friendly teasing Kaine endured from his deputies were evidence enough, but there was only support, never censure. On Christmas Eve, the entire town gathered for a celebration in the church. Zara, now heavily pregnant, sat beside Kaine in the front pew, his hand protectively covering hers. The children performed a nativity scene, carols were sung, and for a few hours, the harsh realities of frontier life were forgotten in the warmth of community and tradition. As they walked home through the crisp night, snowflakes dancing in the light of the street lamps, Kaine stopped suddenly and turned to Zara. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small package from his coat pocket. Inside was a silver locket on a delicate chain. When opened, it revealed a tiny compartment. "I thought you might want to put a bit of Thomas's hair or something inside," Kaine explained, "so the baby can carry a piece of both parents always." Zara's eyes filled with tears at his thoughtfulness. "It's perfect," she whispered, deeply touched that he would honor her first husband's memory this way. "There's something else," Kaine said, suddenly nervous. From his pocket, he withdrew a simple gold ring. "This was my grandmother's. I'm not asking for an answer now, but when you're ready, if you ever are, I want you to have this." Zara stared at the ring, understanding its significance. "Kaine, just hold it for now," he said, placing it in her palm and closing her fingers around it. "A promise that whenever you decide yes or no, I'll respect your choice." They walked home in companionable silence, both aware that something profound had shifted between them. That night, as they sat before the fire watching the snow fall outside, Zara felt the first twinge of what she recognized as the beginning of labor. "Kaine," she said calmly, not wanting to alarm him, "I think you should fetch Dr. Wilson." His eyes widened as he registered her meaning. "The baby? Now?" "But it's early. Only by a couple of weeks," she assured him. "And first babies often come early." The next 12 hours were a blur of pain and determination for Zara. Dr. Wilson arrived promptly, and Mrs. Whitley came to assist, but it was Kaine's steady presence that gave Zara strength through the ordeal. He refused to leave her side, despite the doctor's suggestion that childbirth was women's business. "I'm staying," he insisted, holding Zara's hand as she worked through each contraction. "Unless she asks me to go." Zara squeezed his hand gratefully. "Stay," she managed between pains. As dawn broke on Christmas morning, with snow still falling gently outside, the first cry of new life filled the room. "A boy," Dr. Wilson announced, placing the squalling infant on Zara's chest. "A fine, healthy boy." Zara gazed down at her son in wonder this miracle that had sustained her through the darkest days of her life. He had Thomas's chin and her dark hair, 10 perfect fingers and toes, and a robust cry that spoke of his determination to live. When she looked up at Kaine, she found him watching them both with such tender emotion that it took her breath away. "He's beautiful," Kaine said, voice rough with feeling. "Just like his mother." "Would you like to hold him?" Zara asked after the doctor had cleaned and swaddled the baby. With reverent care, Kaine took the tiny bundle in his strong arms, marveling at the perfect miniature features. "What will you name him?" he asked. Zara had thought long about this. "Thomas for his father," she said softly, "and James for the son you lost." She watched Kaine's face carefully. "If that's all right with you." Kaine's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Thomas James Anderson," he said, testing the name. "It's a fine name for a fine boy." "Actually," Zara said, reaching for the gold ring she'd placed on the bedside table, "I was thinking Thomas James Galloway." She held the ring out to him. "My answer is yes, Kaine. I want to stay. I want us to be a family, you, me, and Thomas." Kaine's face transformed with joy as he carefully passed the baby back to her, then took the ring and slipped it onto her finger. "Are you certain? It's not too soon." "Life is too short and too precious to waste time when you know what's right," Zara said. "I love Thomas and I always will, but my heart has room for a new love too, a love that came when I needed it most." Their kiss was sealed with the promise of a shared future, while outside the window, the Christmas snow continued to fall on Pyramid City, covering the harsh desert landscape in a blanket of pristine white, a clean slate, a new beginning. The wedding took place on New Year's Day, 1879, a simple ceremony in the church with the entire town in attendance. Zara wore a modest cream-colored dress that Mrs. Whitley and the other women had worked together to create, and carried baby Thomas in her arms as she walked down the aisle to where Kaine waited, his face alight with happiness. Their vows were straightforward but heartfelt, acknowledging the paths that had brought them together and the future they chose to build together. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the cheers from the assembled townspeople nearly raised the roof. "Never seen the sheriff smile so much," Deputy Evans commented at the reception held in the hotel dining room. "Man's been walking around like a thundercloud for years, and now look at him." Indeed, Kaine moved through the celebration with an easy grace that surprised even those who knew him best, proudly introducing his wife and son to everyone who approached, his hand rarely leaving the small of Zara's back. "Are you happy, Mrs. Galloway?" he asked when they finally had a moment alone. "Happier than I ever thought I'd be again," Zara admitted, looking down at Thomas sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Though I'm still getting used to the new name." "It suits you," Kaine said, brushing a kiss against her temple. Almost as much as motherhood does. Life settled into a new pattern for the Galloway family. Kaine continued his duties as sheriff, but found himself delegating more responsibilities to his deputies so he could spend time with his family. Zara recovered quickly from childbirth and took to motherhood with natural ease, caring for Thomas while gradually taking on small roles in the community, helping organize the church social, assisting Mrs. Whitley with the town's first lending library, and eventually, when Thomas was 6 months old, filling in as the schoolteacher when Mrs. Peterson fell ill. "You're good with the children," Kaine observed after watching her interact with the town's young students. "They respect you." "I always wanted to teach," Zara admitted. "Before I met Thomas, my first husband, I was studying to become a teacher back in Missouri. Perhaps you should consider it permanently. Mrs. Peterson has been talking about returning east to be near her daughter." The idea took root, and by the following autumn, Zara had officially become Pyramid City schoolteacher, with baby Thomas often accompanying her to class, becoming a beloved mascot to the older children who delighted in entertaining him during their breaks. Their first wedding anniversary approached with another surprise Zara was expecting again. The news filled Kaine with both joy and anxiety, memories of losing Sarah in childbirth casting a shadow over his happiness. "This time will be different," Zara assured him, seeing his worry. "Dr. Wilson says I'm healthy and strong." "I can't lose you," Kaine admitted one night, holding her close as they lay in bed. "Either of you." "You won't," she promised, though they both knew it was beyond her power to guarantee. "But Kaine, whatever happens, know that you gave me a second chance at happiness when I thought all was lost. You saved not just my life, but my faith in humanity." The months passed, and Zara's belly grew along with their happiness. Thomas took his first steps, spoke his first words, and developed a personality that combined Zara's gentleness with a stubborn streak that Kaine insisted must have come from her as well, making her laugh. In the spring of 1880, as wildflowers bloomed across the desert, their daughter entered the world after a labor half as long as Thomas's had been. They named her Elizabeth Sarah Galloway, Elizabeth for Zara's mother, and Sarah to honor the memory of Kaine's first wife. "She has your eyes," Zara said as they admired their daughter in the soft light of dawn. "And your determination," Kaine replied, noting the strong grip with which the infant latched onto his finger. "She'll be a force to reckon with." Thomas, now a sturdy toddler of 16 months, regarded his new sister with solemn curiosity. "Baby?" he asked, pointing. "Yes, your sister," Zara explained. "You'll need to help us take care of her." Thomas nodded as if accepting a great responsibility, then climbed onto the bed to nestle against Zara's side, peering down at the newborn with protective interest. The sight of his family together, his wife, his son, his daughter, filled Kaine with a contentment he had once thought lost to him forever. The journey had been long and marked with loss for both him and Zara, but those very hardships had prepared them to recognize and treasure the joy they'd found together. As Pyramid City grew and prospered, so did the Galloway family. Kaine eventually left his position as sheriff to open the town's first law office, putting his self-taught legal knowledge to use in a less dangerous profession. Zara continued teaching until Elizabeth was ready for school, then took over management of the expanded lending library, which became a cultural center for the growing community. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man with his mother's intelligence and his adoptive father's sense of justice, while Elizabeth proved to be the force they'd predicted: bright, outspoken, and determined to make her mark on the world beyond Pyramid City. On the 10th anniversary of their first meeting, Kaine surprised Zara with a journey back to the spot where he'd found her stranded and alone. The landscape had changed little, still harsh, still beautiful in its stark way, but the broken wagon and grave marker were long gone, reclaimed by the desert. "Why did you bring me here?" Zara asked as they stood together in the shade of a lone mesquite tree. "To remind us both how far we've come," Kaine said, taking her hands in his. 10 years ago, I found a pregnant woman with nothing but grief and determination to her name. I offered her shelter, never imagining she would end up sheltering me from the loneliness that had become my life. Zara leaned against him, remembering the desperate woman she had been. I was so afraid that day, afraid of dying alone, afraid of living on without Thomas, afraid of bringing a child into a world that seemed so hostile. And now? Kaine asked, his arms encircling her waist. She turned in his embrace to face him, her hands coming to rest on either side of his face, a face more lined than when they'd met, but no less handsome to her eyes. Now I know that life can begin again, even in the most unlikely places. That love can find us when we least expect it but most need it. I said I had room for two hearts that day, Kaine recalled with a smile. But our home has grown to hold so many more. And there's still room for whatever comes next, Zara said, thinking of their children growing up, the possibility of grandchildren someday, the expanding circle of their family and community. As they rode back to Pyramid City together, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The young woman who had buried her husband and continued west alone, carrying an unborn child and little hope, could never have imagined the life awaiting her, a life rebuilt from tragedy, sustained by courage, and ultimately transformed by love that came unexpectedly, like rain in the desert, bringing renewal and growth where only survival had seemed possible. The setting sun cast long shadows across the Arizona landscape as they approached the town they both now called home. Lights twinkled in windows, smoke rose from chimneys, and in the distance, they could see Thomas and Elizabeth waiting on the porch of their house, waving excitedly at the sight of their parents returning. "Home," Kaine said simply, the word carrying all the meaning in the world. Zara squeezed his hand, her heart full. "Yes," she agreed. "Home." The two hearts that had found shelter together had built not just a home, but a legacy of love that would endure long after the desert had claimed their footprints in its endless sands. For in the unforgiving landscape of the Wild West, they had discovered the most precious truth of all, that hope, like the desert wildflowers after rain, can bloom in the most barren places when nurtured by compassion, courage, and love.